All right, welcome, Chargers. We are back to our channel, Charge Max Chess. And for today, we will start with a series, the first of a series of videos, training videos for this channel. And the title of our video, title of our studies, will be the memorable games of 2021. One of the games that is memorable to me this year is this game against Surya Shekhar Ganguly from India. Just a bit of an intro to our opponent. Ganguly is best known as one of the seconds that assisted Anand in the World Championship against Kramnik, Topalov, and Gelfand in 2008. A very strong grandmaster from India. He is also a theoretician. Okay, the first time I played him was back in, if my memory serves me right, it was back 15 years ago, I think. I'm not sure. Or maybe I'm quite old, yeah. About 10 years back in Bangkok, Thailand, in the Bangkok Open. We had a draw back then, and then the next game I lost to him. Okay, I won a game in 2018, I think, 3 years back in the Asian Championship Blitz. And this is our fourth encounter, so head to head, 1.5 each, going into this one. All right, without further ado, let's go through the game. I was black in this game. Okay, let me just flip the boardy. Okay, I was black. Ganguly was white. Okay, preparation wise, okay, I was not really into chess for the past 2 years. Okay, not into game face mood for the past 2 years because of the pandemic. So I have been rusty as well. This is the ninth round of the Sharjah Masters. I wasn't so sure also if I won this game, maybe there's a maybe, a big maybe, a big if. If I won this game, probably I could get my last norm. I wasn't so sure, though. Okay, now it started with c4. Okay, we c4 is what we call the English opening. Ganguly can play any opening there is in the book. He can play e4, he can play d4, he can play knight f3. On this day, he went for c4. Okay, I wanted to create a surprise as well. I played a g6. Probably he wasn't expecting this one. Because in round number 4, I played e6 against c4. There are a lot of options, by the way. Okay, that's against c4. We have e5, which is the reverse Sicilian. We know very well that the Sicilian is e4, c5. Yep, it's e4, c5. So the reverse Sicilian with c4, e5. We can also go for c4, c6, which is called the Slav. And we can also go for c4, e6 that goes into the Tarash or whatever. We can also go for f5 here, goes into the Dutch or the stone wall. Okay, the English opening is one of the most flexible openings there is. So with c4, you can, of course, expect more transpositions in the middle game. Okay, in this game, I played g6. All right. He played knight c3. I played c5. He played knight to f3. Everything's normal. I played bishop to g7. He played g3. Now we have a symmetrical pawn structure. So this is a symmetrical English with g3 and g6. We have c4 and c5. Bishop g2 is coming up. Okay, knight c6, bishop g2, e5. Okay, in the beginning of the game, I actually was giving up. Okay, if you look back from the first move with c4 g6, I was giving up this central squares, right? But from the last move that you have seen, if you look at the last move where I played the move e5, it's black now who has the control of the middle. So now black has a grip on that d4 square, right? With the pawn on e5, pawn on c5, and the knight on c6. So he castled. Okay, knight g e7. You can also go for knight f6, but here I went to e7, of course, so that I can push my pawn f5 later. He went for a3. Okay. The main point of a3 is that he wants to have a queenside expansion with probably rook to b1 and then b4. And if, let's say, I stop that pawn with a5, it gives me a hold on b6. Okay, so I castled. He played rook b1. Now comes d5. Okay, this is the first critical position. Takes on d5, knight takes d5. Now, in the game he played d3, but let's look at this knight takes e5 idea. As you can see, the knight on c3 is attacking d5, and the bishop is also hitting on my knight. So there's a double attack on the d5 knight, yes? So if I take that knight on e5, he takes that knight on d5, that means he wins a pawn because from here he captured a pawn on e5, right? He captured a pawn on e5. But here black has this intermediate move, knight takes c3. But white also has a counter move, intermezzo with knight takes c6. It's hitting my queen. I'm hitting his queen. He's hitting my queen. But here's this intermediate check with knight takes e2. Queen takes e2. Bishop takes pawn takes c6. Okay, black has doubled pawns, but in terms of activity, black is ahead because now bishop f5 is coming. And okay, with bishop f5, I'm hitting the rook on b1. At the same time, there's also an attack on d3, skewer on the rook on f1, right? For example, he captures. Some young players would try to go for captures, right? When they see capture, to go for capture. But unfortunately, bishop takes c6 is wrong because now I have bishop f5. Yep. If let's say he protects the rook with bishop e4, I have rook to e8, a pin, yeah, a basic pin. The rook is pinning the queen on e2. And if he goes d3, I have bishop h3 attacking the rook on f1. But at the same time, I also have this f5 threat, putting more pressure on the pinned piece on e4. Yep. And if he goes queen f3, for example, bishop takes f1, he takes on a8, I would take on d3, hitting the rook. I also am attacking the bishop on a8, and also I have rook e1, multiple threats, yeah? With king g2, there's bishop f1, king goes back to g1, and bishop h3 is going to be mate. Yep. So in chess, okay, there are two things that you need to remember when you're playing a game. Yeah, if you want to be a strong player in chess, you just need two things, two skills that you need to develop. One is the ability to calculate and the ability to visualize. Okay, so this is part of the calculation. Yes. So before I play d5, I had to anticipate all these moves. Okay, so what comes into play is also what we call this prophylactic thinking. Yes, so it's anticipation of what's going to happen. Okay, so after knight takes d5, he went for d3. All right, just a developing move. But just to mention here, this structure with d3 and g3 and a3, it's resembling the reverse dragon, right? White has a dragon setup. You know very well the Sicilian dragon. We have e4, c5, knight f3, g6, yes, and then we have knight c6, later on d6, knight f6. But with a3, there's also a combination of the Najdorf. So we call this one the Dradorf, yeah, the dragon and Najdorf at the same time, but it's white playing it, so it's the reverse dragon or the reverse Dradorf. So after d3, I play knight c7. Okay, the main point of knight c7 is that it's protecting the rook on a8 if in case black wants to go for b5 to avoid this discovered attack on the rook on a8. So the knight protects the rook. So anticipating once again. All right, this is his main point of a3 and rook b1, going for b4, being consistent. So takes, knight e4, centralizing the knight. Knight to d2. Okay, knight cb5. I don't want his pawn to progress one more, right? Or else he will develop his bishop on a3. If the pawn is on b5, he can put his knight on e4 and then can go to d6. Yes, if you look at the bishop over here. So I'm putting a blockade on that pawn. So takes. Bishop goes to b2. That's the final developing move. I still have my bishop on c8. I cannot move at the moment because the bishop is hitting my pawn on b7. So queen e7. Another important point here. I am giving myself freedom. Yes, let's say for the bishop. For me to move the bishop, I have to protect the b7 pawn with the queen. And important also when you're developing a queen in the early part of the game, the queen has to be behind a pawn. It's not good to put a queen on an open file, right? Because it's vulnerable to threats. Like for example, I put my rook here. Now I have to move my queen again. Okay, so remember that one. Huh? When you're playing the game, in the early part of the game, at least put that queen behind the pawn to be safe. Yes, because the queen also is the most powerful piece on the board. King being the most important. Okay, knight c4, bishop f5. Okay, finally, I completed my development. Queen d2, rook a c8, a rook on an open file. We have one open file here, the c file. The opponent play rook k1, rook f d8, nice knight on b5, it's protecting the pawn on a7. Queen e3, moving out of the pin because I was going for rook takes c4. If the queen stays on d2, I have rook takes c4 winning a piece. Push e4, takes, d takes e4, okay. I played bishop e6. Maybe much better was bishop g4, I believe, so that as I cannot. Okay, not allowing him to get the e5 square. Maybe bishop e6 is not the optimal move in this position. And he played knight e5, and queen takes b4. Now I have two exciting pass pawns here, two connected pawns as well. When I captured on b4, I had a feeling that maybe I have a chance in this game. But strong GMs, they're very resourceful. Yeah, you have to be careful all the time. Okay, rook fb1, queen d4, another not so good move, just like bishop e6. Maybe much better was queen c3. Yes. If the queen captures on c3, for example, I can capture with a knight. He takes my pawn on b7. I will also have a counterplay on e2. If the king goes on f1, an important strategic play where the rook controls the second rank, right? The rook on the second rank. He also has a rook on the seventh. If this rook cannot take on a7 because I have rook d1 mate, we call it the back rank mate. Yeah. And if this rook captures a7, I have rook on d2. The rook on d8 to d2. You double the rooks on the second rank. Double the trouble, right? And if, let's say, knight goes to f3, I have knight takes g3. F takes g3, rook takes g2, bishop c4 is coming up, rook f2 is coming up, and maybe a mate is in the horizon. All right, so going back, I played queen d4. I'm not so happy with what I played here. Took. Of course, he protected the pawn on e2, or else I will have that same plan with knight e2, rook c2. b5, pass pawn must be pushed. Okay, my two pawns are being attacked, this rook and this rook. I have to save one, and I have to save the b pawn, yes. I want to save the b pawn since the knight is protecting it. He captured on a7, push that pawn. If, for example, he captures this pawn, I have rook c1, yes. And I'm threatening also bishop h3 and rook f1 mate. He has to be careful. So when I played b4, he played e3. Knight c2, protecting the pawn, okay. You have to protect your pass pawns because the pass pawn is a potential queen. Yes, well, remember that when the pawn reaches the end of the board, you can change it to a queen, rook, knight, or bishop. It's according to what you like. Of course, you want to promote to a queen, yeah, the most powerful piece that is worth 9 points. Okay, he went to knight d3. He is hitting my pawn on b4 at the same time. He wants also to hit the bishop on e6 with knight f4. So I have this move g5. We call this one restriction. I have to restrict the knight from going to f4. Since knight takes b4 is not possible because I have takes, again, the control of the back rank. And rook d1 is coming to town. Because if the opponent, for example, plays rook d4, stopping my rook, bishop h3 is looming, and checkmate on f1, right? And if I go checkmate, I'll drink to that. That's for checkmate. Okay. Anyways, let's go back. So he cannot capture the pawn. He went for rook a5, hitting my pawn on g5, yes, and then knight f4 comes again. Very tricky. So I was like, all right, go get it, yeah. Take that pawn. I'm gonna hit your knight. If rook takes g5, for example, here, I gotta go king f6, yep. And I will go for two minor pieces for a rook. Plus I have this pass pawn on b4. Well, it should be all right. I should be all right, yep. So rook c3, knight takes b4. Takes on b4. Now I have rook d1, or even rook c1 is possible. King g2. And I was very excited when I had this position on the board, right? Imagine I have two rooks attacking the bishop on f1. In the game, he went for rook to g5. Now let's look at bishop e2, for example. If bishop e2, rook g1, I will be very happy with this one. King f3, g4 check. And if he goes king f4, I have rook to c2. Alright, skewer on f2. If the bishop takes the pawn, rook takes f2. If the king stays to protect the bishop, h6. If king h4, I have takes on h2. And it's another mate. So I was very excited when I played rook d1. I was like, I'm very close to winning this one. Yeah, I'm very, very close to winning this game against a very strong grandmaster, Ganguly. Yeah. So he went for rook takes g5. He cannot move his bishop. Yeah. King f6. Now I have a double attack. King attacks the rook. Rook attacks the bishop. We're like, woohoo! I'm winning a piece, right? I'm winning a piece. And eventually, maybe, or maybe, the game. Will it happen? We'll see. So after h4, I won a piece. Right, deep inside me, I was like, dooks, 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 dooks. Right, oh, this is winning. And maybe a norm is coming up because this is the last round. This is the ninth round. I wasn't so sure about my rating performance though, but maybe because he's 2630, and I had a few other wins against GMs, so maybe right. I lost to Magsudlu in the second round. First round I lost to Sitoraman. Both were good games, but I blundered somewhere. So I played with some strong players, by the way. Okay, he played rook to b7. This is tricky. You have to have the sense of danger. Right? Important, huh? Sense of danger. E5 is a mate, so you have to be aware. Okay, awareness is also important in chess. So rook g1 check, king f3, bishop c8, freeing a space for my king, or else e5 is a mate. So rook b6, king goes to e7, rook to b2, rook c6, threatening rook f6 check, rook e5, king f8, and he played rook b8. Okay, this is when he played rook b8 on the 40th move, and this is the most critical position in the game. Yeah. Chess is also just like life, yes. When you are given a chance, you are given an opportunity, when the opportunity is in front of you, you have to grab it. And let's drink to that first before we go. And unfortunately, I wasn't able to grab that opportunity. But I can forgive myself for thinking that I had to think of my king first. Yeah. I went for king safety. So I played h6, rook b5, and king g7. So I moving out of the pin while I have rook c2 and rook f6 coming up. but he was very, very smart, and he played rook to b6, protecting f6, and if I play rook c2, he has rook b2. Two important squares where I could have, dominated, but he was able to defend. Yep. And when I played king g7, I was like, this is not happening. The win is getting away from me. Yep. Oh my God. It's out of reach now. The rest is just a matter of formality, and this is going to end up in a draw, right? Because white is able to create what we call a fortress, the Berlin Wall. Yeah, it cannot break this wall. Yeah, it's creating a fortress. I cannot do anything, so I was just going for king f8, b5. OMG, yes, OMG. But it happens. It happens. Mistakes happen. We are prone to mistakes. I'm just a normal human being. Maybe I was too excited. I have enough time, by the way, for me to save the king, right? Back to this important position, yes. If I thought for at least, okay, maybe I thought for at least 5 to 10 minutes here, I could have found rook. I might have found rook c2, and this is the winning move. Yes, this is the winning move, rook c2. Rook f1 is coming up. How to protect f2 is out of the window because the rook cannot go back to b2. The rook cannot go to f5 because the bishop is here. And if he goes for rook d5, for example, I have king e7, rook e5 check. I have bishop e6, or even king f6, even king f6. He goes rook to g5, for example, rook f1, e5 check, king back to e7, king e4, rook takes f2. Yeah. And if he goes rook d5, it's the same thing, rook f1, e5, king e7. Let's say a move like h5. And now we have this what we call the mating pattern. Rook f takes f2, king e4, bishop f5 check, king d4, rook f d2. Yes, checkmate. Yep. Okay, so that was very sad. Yeah, it was a sad moment for me. Okay, but it's memorable. We learn from our mistakes. Life goes on. And that's the moral lesson of this game. That it's not the end of the world. There are still more tournaments coming up. There are still more games to for us to recover. And probably, if we want to fight for something, if we have a goal, we should never stop fighting. If another opportunity comes, try knocking on them. Try knocking on them. Every time it comes, we're just there. And also, um, in this game, we also see we learn that these strong grandmasters, they are hard, very hard to beat. Yes, because even in their worst positions or in bad games, they are still very resourceful. Right? They make it hard for you to get that single point. They're not giving up easily. Yeah? So that's a lesson. If you want to be like them, if you want to play like them, you have to make it hard for the opponent to get that point. Yes? Keep finding ways, be creative, be resourceful, and also look for moments. Another thing is look for moments because at one it could be on move number 7. You will never know move number 7, or it could be move number 82. Right? It could be differently. Yeah, it could be different. It could be on the opening. It could be in the middle game, or it could be the end game. You have to wait for your moments, and if that moment comes, grab it. Yeah, grab it. But sometimes in this end game, we feel a bit tired because you are sitting for the last, let's say, last three. or 2.5 hours, 2.5 to 3 hours. So your energy level goes down, although it's not an excuse, because before the tournament you could go for a bit of exercise, so that the mental and the physical goes side by side. All right, so I hope you like the video, the training video for today. We will have more of this in the coming days. Just check our channel, Charge Max Chess on YouTube and also on Facebook. We also have a Twitter page and Instagram. And we will have more of this in the days to come. I'll see you guys around and stay safe. This is Coach Oliver signing off.